Hey, my name is Daniel and welcome back to another Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era video, and today we're doing a region breakdown. This is a video series where I cover one province at a time and explaining everything you need to know to get started. How the Overland Mechanic works, what to expect from delves or native enemy skill, towns or town effects are worth taking, and explain some dungeon and endgame rules. And well, without further ado, let's go! Alright, so let's talk all about Skyrim today. And Skyrim is a little bit different from any other region, first and foremost because it has two overland maps. As you can see here we have Eastern Skyrim, and on the flip side of this sheet you will see there is a Western Skyrim as well. So two overland maps, but during a session you always use only one of them, either Eastern or Western, and all rules that we're gonna talk about apply of course to both parts of this region. And how do you know which map to use? For that you need to take a look at the starting location of your guild quest. For example, here we're looking at the Skyrim Gazetteer. As you can see, it includes both eastern and western parts of this region. And if you open up, let's say here we have the Mages Guild and we have starting location in Solitude in Western Skyrim. And if we take a look here at the Thieves Guild, the starting location at Riften in Eastern Skyrim. So that is how you know which part of the map is to use. But now let's take a look at the main overland mechanic in this province, which is all about towns under siege. As you can see here at the bottom left corner of the map, we have three symbols which determine what towns are currently under siege. Now, during setup, you place this token to track what towns are under siege, but you first place it aside, meaning on your day one, your first town encounter is always not under siege, so you basically ignoring this mechanic on day one completely. And only at the end of day one, when you draw a peaceful encounter card as always to activate the province effect, you then consult with the symbol, and in this case we have this sort of up arrow pointing up. That means you would then place this token here on the first slot of the corresponding icon. It means for the next day, on day 2, the following towns will be under siege that has the same matching icon. Like for example we have Nimelten or Mistwatch or Fort Amol or Fort Morvenskar. All those towns, they have the same symbol, meaning they would be under siege for a given day. And some towns even have multiple of those icons, meaning they will likely be under siege more often compared to some others. And what means when the town is under siege? Well, I'm glad you asked, because when you visit a town that is under siege, you're initiating a clash. And I already done the setup over here. That is how a usual town under siege look like, and let's explain what's going on here. So if we take a look at the page 4 of the Gazetteer, we can see the setup of this clash, which I already here pre-set up, and all of those upside down tiles like I placed over here, they represent different buildings or different features of a town. Here in the middle we have town square, at the bottom guild kiosk, then the inn or the tavern, then the shop, and then the trainers up here. And so instead of having town encounter as a sort of like abstract mechanic, here in this case you're fighting your way through to take the corresponding buildings and their corresponding town actions. That means you deploy on the entrance tile as always, you deploy enemies according to your enemy pool as always, just in any other clash, but in order for you to take a town action, you need to actually physically occupy a corresponding building to take that effect. For example, if you want to go to the trainers, you would actually need to move 4 steps from the entrance tile, 1, 2, 3, 4, and once you occupy the corresponding building, then you need to make an engage, and during that engage you're not rolling any dice, you just taking that town action, and after that you would end your turn. And of course, and probably most importantly, you have your round counter ticking as normal, just like in any other battle. Now, couple of important clarifications. First of all, you may not have all the buildings like I have over here, depending on their availability in a given town. For example, let's just open a few towns to give a couple of examples. Let's say here in Dusk Town, as you can see, we have all town features available. So this is why we're gonna have all of those buildings set up if you visit this town under siege. But let's say in a different town, here in Dragonbridge, we have shop closed, and so if you visit Dragon Bridge while it's under siege, you would not attach this part, which once again represents the shop according to this setup diagram. As you can see, this top part is a shop, but if the shop is closed, naturally you not add this part at all. So that is first clarification. A couple of other important things is that normally all battles have objective. An objective might be, for example, conquer, which means defeat all enemies, or eliminate, which is to defeat a specific enemy. But here, even despite the fact that it is a battle, there is no battle objective. And that means you can decide to end this battle at the end of any round. Now, another important clarification is that you reveal all items in the shop or all skill lines in the trainer at the start of this encounter. So you don't need to occupy a specific building in order to see what's available in that specific building. You simply reveal as normal. For example, here we have in Dusktown, we have 2 common items, so you would place them as always. You can place them somewhere nearby, let's say like that. And then if you want to, you can take this action as you normally have, as you normally would in a town encounter by visiting the shop, even though in this case, once again, you need to actually fight your way through the enemies and actually physically moving your character to a corresponding building and then making another engage to actually take that item. But if you don't want to have anything from the shop, once again, you can always end this encounter at the end of any round, so you don't have to defeat all enemies. Even though if you manage to defeat all enemies or somehow eliminate them in any other ways, you'll get 1 free bonus town action, and you can use that specific bonus town action without occupying a specific building. This is just a little extra. Now, another important clarification is that even if you manage to defeat all enemies, let's say on round 1 or round 2, and there will be no more enemies here on this clash, the round counter will still continue. So let's say if after defeating all enemies you would want to visit trainers and then head your way back here to the guild kiosk, you would actually need to move as normal, and the round count of course will continue as normal, meaning on round 6 and beyond it will be fatigue rounds. You will take fatigue damage and all of those usual things like you normally would in any other battle, even though potentially you can heal that over fatigue and all of that in the tavern, of course provided it is available in a given town. And maybe last but not least, even though it is a clash, but it's still a town encounter. Meaning if you have any effects that trigger at the start of a town encounter, whether it be a side quest or a class ability, they all still work as normal. So it is a bit of a hybrid because it is technically a town encounter, but you just have a battle on top of it. So all the battle things like using items or using class abilities in battle, rolling dice and all of those things, they both apply, which definitely makes this type of encounter feel a bit different from anything else in the game. Now, if you would like to see how all of that actually played in action, I have a full campaign playthrough played in Skyrim, and I've been doing a bunch of Under Siege town encounters like that. Just thought I'd mention that in case you would want to see this in action. So that was all when it comes to the main Overland mechanic in Skyrim, those towns under siege. If you want, potentially in most cases you can completely avoid visiting towns under siege entirely. It once again depends on the province effect that you're drawing on the peaceful encounter cards, and depending on whether you are heading one way or another, sometimes it is possible to avoid those under siege encounters altogether, but frankly they are a lot of fun, and as they turn in those kind of abstract town encounters into something much more real and quite thematic. Now let me place this overland map aside and let's talk all about the delve feature in this region. So let me quickly place everything aside for a moment, and as I said, we're going to talk about delves and its main feature called Icy Buildup. Now, Icy Buildup is a special feature and a special delve deck that you do not shuffle into your main delve deck. Instead, you place it aside, and it says the following: during delves, each party member's health stat is reduced by the number of frostbite chips on this card to a minimum of 1. So let's say your character is in the delve, you trigger exploration, you draw the delve card as normal, and what you may find is that there are some traps or other effects that may instruct you to add frostbite chip to the Icy Buildup. And Icy Buildup is this card that we placed aside, and whenever you add a frostbite chip, you track it using normal health chips, and for any frostbite on Icy Buildup, your health stat is reduced by 1. And remember that your current HP that you have under your adventure chip cannot exceed the health stat. So whenever you reduce a health stat, you're also reducing the health under your character accordingly. So if a high elf that starts with 4 health stat gets 1 Icy Buildup, this 1 frostbite chip, it means the health stat is temporarily reduced down to 3, and therefore will need to take 1 HP chip away, leaving with only 3 health, and this of course continue every time you add in more and more frostbite to the icy buildup to a very minimum of 1. So all those ice and frost caves, they are weakening your character, potentially losing more and more HP as you encounter different traps or other effects that add more frostbites to this icy buildup on one way or another. And the nasty thing about having health stat reduced is that you cannot heal it back during battle. Meaning, if you currently have only health stat of 2 because you have 2 frostbite chips in icy buildup, even if you use any healing abilities, you cannot heal those health back unless you remove those icy buildup first. And there are of course some different ways of removing that. And of course, once the delve is over, whether you succeeded or not, those frostbite chips are removed from the icy buildup, meaning you gain your health stat back. And whenever you gain a health stat, you always get the respective HP back as well. And so in this case, if your health stat was temporarily reduced by 2, then at the end of this delve, you effectively gaining 2 health stat back, and therefore you healing for 2 lost HP. So it's not that bad. It does not persist between battles to battles, from delve to delve. It is only during a delve you temporarily reducing your health stat, but then of course you gain it back. So I know it sounds very intimidating, but it's actually quite manageable. Now let me place all those delve tiles aside and let's talk about the native skill in this province. So let me place our old friend Spider with the enemy skill native, and as a reminder, this enemy skill works slightly different in each province, and here specifically in Skyrim, this enemy skill is called Freeze, and it says the following. When this unit determines a target, its target must move 1 item from a ready slot to their pack. If the party is currently in Under Siege Town, the target must move all items to their pack. So each adventurer has 8 slots in their inventory, with up to 4 items in their ready slots and 4 more items in their pack. And just to illustrate it, let me place maybe 4 items like that to indicate that these are items we currently have in our ready slots, and then we have 4 more items in the pack for a collective total of 8 items. That is the maximum capacity of the inventory, and inventory includes both items in the ready slot and items in the pack. And so whenever an enemy engages you and determines you as a target, you need to move 1 item from your ready slot to your pack, with the caveat of course that during the battle you can only use items that are in your ready slot. So for example, you might move this glyph from your ready slot to your pack, meaning you won't be able to activate this glyph during battle. But the way this ability is specifically worded is that the effect triggers when this unit determines a target, and that means that it happens before you have a chance to react or prevent this effect or use any armor pieces. Like here we have, for example, we have Barkskin Helmet, which is an item that you normally would use as a reaction to enemy engage. But if this would be the last item, let's say all other items already in the pack, and we have this last armor piece left and the spider engages us again, and so we would need to place this item in the pack before we even have a chance to prevent the damage or use anything for that matter. So basically, as soon as the enemy engages you, you move 1 item from your ready slot to your pack, and if all of this happens in an Under Siege Town encounter that we covered previously in this clash, then you immediately move all of your items at once, all of them to your pack. Now, importantly, you're not losing any of those items. Remember, the whole inventory capacity is 8 items, and you still have all of those 8 items regardless whether they are in the pack or in the ready slot. If you move things around, you still have, well, 8 items. That is the maximum number of items you might have. So you're not losing anything, but of course you're not able to use items in battle that are not in your ready slots, which definitely makes this ability quite dangerous, especially if your build or your character relies heavily on items, simply because you won't have a chance to use them for the rest of the battle. Even though, of course, once the battle is over and then you start a new battle, of course you're free to rearrange your inventory in any way you want. But while the enemy skill native is quite brutal in Under Siege Towns, and obviously getting through these towns while they're under siege can be a bit problematic sometimes, but there are great reasons to visit quite a lot of actually towns in Skyrim, so let's talk all about them. What towns and what town effects are worth at least knowing. And let's start actually with the traveling caravan, because it's quite tricky in this province. It says at the start of this encounter, each adventurer must spend 2 tenacity or untrain a skill line, and all dice in that skill line or flip their class sheet to the opposite side. Now, it says specifically that each adventurer must spend 2 tenacity, and spending tenacity is not the same as passing a social check, meaning if you have speech dice, you cannot roll them for this purpose, and if you don't have any tenacity, well, means you need to pay the cost in some other ways, like training a skill line and all dice in that skill line, which is honestly quite brutal. And just as a quick reminder, you cannot untrain combat skill line that each adventurer start with, so this is not a way of removing it for free, unfortunately. But another way you can pay sort of the cost of visiting Traveling Caravan is to flip a class sheet to the opposite side. Now, if your class is still on its novice side and you land here in the Traveling Caravan, that is effectively a free master upgrade, master promotion to your class. You flipping it to the opposite side and there you go. You've become master, and this is potentially a great way of promoting without the hassle of doing the normal requirement. Of course, the caveat is that if you visit this Traveling Caravan while you're already at the master side, and let's say you don't have 2 tenacity to spend and you don't want to untrain your entire skill line with all the dice, that means you would need to flip your class sheet once again, meaning you would be downgraded to the novice side again. And of course, you would then need to fulfill your requirement if you want to get back to the master side. So this is definitely something to be aware of. Ideally, you would probably want to land on the Traveling Caravan in Skyrim while you're still on the novice side to hopefully get a free promotion to the master side. But once you are on the master side, I would definitely recommend not dealing with anything on the unstable encounter unless you have at least 2 tenacity ready to pay if you don't want to get downgraded to the novice side. I thought I'll mention that and give a quick heads up in case that helps. Nevertheless, really interesting town encounter. Let's take a look at some other towns. As I mentioned, there are quite a few good ones over here. And the first one is right here, Dusk Town in western Skyrim, and specifically the town square action. It's called Vampiric Experience, and each adventurer must spend party-sized tenacity, and you gain the following persistent effect. For the rest of this campaign, adventurers may choose not to lose HP when they would be affected by enemy skill siphon. Now, enemy skill siphon is something you will probably find on some level 20 enemies, but once you get to the end game of Skyrim, you will inevitably encounter at least one enemy called Vampire, which does have this enemy skill siphon, and it is a quite nasty thing. The enemy with this skill sort of siphons health from everyone around, gaining more and more health, and there is basically no way of preventing that effect, because it's not considered damage. You cannot prevent it with your armor or any other dice or abilities effects for that matter, but with this town score action you become completely immune to that effect, and not just for the session but for the entire campaign. And once again, this enemy Vampire is someone you inevitably gonna fight in the end game, so it is a fantastic way of making that encounter a little bit easier if you're playing in western Skyrim. Definitely consider visiting Dusk Town at least once if you play both sessions in western Skyrim. Now let's move on next, and we have here Fort Morvunskar. Sorry, I have no idea how to pronounce it correctly, but the point is we have a constellation specific trainers. As you can see, both mage and thief constellations, they are sort of grayed out, meaning whenever you populate skill tokens with the trainers, you only reveal warrior type skill lines, which is a fantastic way of finding a specific skill line you're looking for. Let's say you started with two-handed and you then want to find heavy armor skill line. Well, this is the place where you can do this almost guaranteed. I always value those kind of effects very highly, and they will be even much more relevant when the all new expansions come out and you're gonna have many more skill lines added to the trainer bag. So always keep in mind those kind of constellation specific trainers. I think this is a great value, especially if you want to plan your build with a specific skill lines in mind. Now let's move on. There are still plenty of good towns to cover, like for example over here in Kar's Watch. Once again, for the town square action, it says search the common deck and gain the first weapon or armor, then shuffle the deck. And I would say most great weapons are actually in the common deck. So being able to find a weapon or armor, I think it's a great value, especially if your build rely on those specific items. Similarly, we have Killcraft Temple, where you can search the common item deck and gain the first enchantment, which is particularly helpful for a sorcerer and its masterclass promotion. And speak of sorcerer, Also in this town, we have 5 trainers only of the mage constellation, so if you're looking for something like Daedric Summoning, Non-Destruction Staff, or Restoration Light, or Illusion, or any other mage type skill lines, this is the place for you to train them. Also in Western Skyrim, by the way. Once again, I rate those type of effects really highly. I think they are fantastic, especially if you put a little bit of thoughts into planning your character advancements and you want specific skill lines for your build. And similar to the town we just covered in Karth's Watch, similar effect we have in Mark Karth, another town in Western Skyrim that you may search. You may discard a weapon to search a legendary deck and gain the first weapon that shares the same battle form as the weapon you discarded. That is once again a fantastic effect if you're looking for a specific weapon, particularly from the legendary deck. I think that is a great value, especially probably for two-handed skill line. Now let's move on next. Mistwatch, that is another town that allow you to train on the warrior type skill lines, which is once again so useful. But this time it is in Eastern Skyrim, so both parts of this province are covered when it comes to training warrior type skill lines. Definitely keep those in mind, but that is far from all. There is still so many goodness and good town effects, like for example in Rebel's Retreat. And for the town square it says untrain a skill die and train a skill die 1 level higher in the same skill line. And the way it's phrased may be a little bit confusing, but let's say you have a level 1 skill die and you have a level 2 skill die. And if you want to, you can untrain a level 2 skill die and instead train a level 1 higher, so level 3, so you would be missing level 2 in between. You will have level 1 and then straight level 3. Which is not how you normally train. Normally, in order to train 1 level higher, you first need to have either die already trained over the same level or a previous level. But for this specific effect, I have reached out to the Chip 3 Games devs and they confirmed that this effect is specifically meant to bypass that restriction, and you can indeed just untrain a level 2 skill die to instead train a level 3 skill die. That is how it works, and that is incredible value if you think about it. It can definitely save you some experience without having any battles, and of course you also get the benefit of visiting a town and potentially grabbing some items along the way. And of course you're not limited to only once per session, you can do this effect multiple times if this is something you want. So Rebel's Retreat once again in Western Skyrim, definitely keep this town in mind. And I believe there was something else worth noting. Let me double check. Oh yes, of course, in Solitude we have once again a town square action. It's the Bard's College. If there is a Bard adventure in your party, you gain 1 tenacity, or search the legendary deck and gain an item with the instrument trait. So if you have a Bard in party, that is fantastic, but probably it's even better if you don't have a Bard in your party, because it says if there is not a Bard adventure in your party, you gain the Bard class sheet and place it next to your current class sheet on its novice side, and you gain the following persistent effect. For the rest of this session, you have access to the Bard class sheet and all of its abilities in addition to your current class. So if you played Bard, you know that it is a fantastic class that can help with rerolling dice and healing and do some other cool things that you can have in addition to your class. So it is definitely a very fun but very powerful effect that can be a great help, especially early game. So Solitude in Western Skyrim, another good town to know. And here in Skull's Retreat in Eastern Skyrim, once again we have a constellation specific trainers for mage skill lines, which is once again very powerful. So as you can see, we have plenty of good towns in both parts of Skyrim. Oh, and by the way, we have with the star in Eastern Skyrim with Thief constellations. So whether you want to train acrobatics or speech or legerdemain, this is a fantastic place for doing that. So loads and loads of very useful town effects. Definitely don't sleep on those. Now let's break down the end game of Skyrim, starting with day 1 that happens in this Greymoore Keep, the dungeon which I already set up, and I'm gonna explain the rules as we go. So the special rules for this dungeon are the following. Before deploying any other units, deploy a level 20 vampire to Hex A. This is why I said that you're gonna encounter a vampire no matter what in this endgame. This is the Hex A, and I already deployed this unit over here. Then place stacks of party size HP on star hexes of the party's choice equal to party size. So if you're playing with a single adventure, you would have a single HP chip placed in either of those star hexes. If you're playing with 2 characters, that would be 2 stacks of 2 HP with 3 adventurers, 3 stacks of 3 HP, and if you're playing with full party, that would be 4 stacks of 4 HP each, and these are blood nexuses. Blood nexuses may be targeted and damaged like enemies, and while blood nexuses are active, the vampire cannot lose HP, be defeated, or otherwise be removed from play. So basically this vampire is completely immortal while those blood nexuses are active, meaning they are present here, but you can damage them, and ideally you want to defeat them, so then you can start dealing some damage to the vampire, because you will likely need to defeat it as well. Now, very important clarification, which is actually not quite obvious, and it says specifically that blood nexuses may be targeted and damaged like enemies, but what this instruction does not mention is that those blood nexuses are affected by Siphon as well. And this is crucial, because that means this vampire will suck off the HP chip of those blood nexuses themselves, of course, as long as it within its range. I think it's not very obvious, and I specifically asked Chipsy Games for clarification, and they confirmed that yes, those blood nexuses are indeed affected by Siphon, so I thought I'd mention it. But now let's go to the actual day 1 rules. This was only the dungeon setup, which we're gonna need for day 1 encounter, and let's read the rules. It says, set up Greymoore Keep dungeon using the end of session difficulty EP. As you can see, I've already done the setup, even though I'm not gonna deploy enemies. Just with your permission, I'm gonna skip this part. Obviously this enemy pool depends on your player count and so on. Then add level 20 Bryhard to the EP and deploy it first. So this is why on the spot number 1, as you can see here on the dungeon, this is the first deployment hex. And here I placed this Bryhard. This enemy will always be the one deployed first. Then set aside 1 unused 7 hex delve tile along with quest units Pale Fingers, Vampiric Dislanderer, Break the Bloody, and Corrupted Creature. Now for the unused 7 hex delve tile, instead of setting it aside, I've already placed here in the middle. It is currently not in use. It's kind of like a blocked room that no one have access to, but we're going to talk about that in just a moment. Then it says, set the XP dial to the following number depending on your difficulty level, and this is used for quest tracking purposes. For Apprentice, it's just party size, on Adept it's party size +3, and Expert is party size +6. So because we have 2 stacks of 2 HP on those blood nexuses, this is kind of like a for 2 character setup, and that means, for example, on Expert difficulty that would be a number of 8. This is why I have XP dial set on number 8, even though of course this number will be different depending on your player count and your difficulty level. Then encounter rules. Initiate Greymoore Keep dungeon. After level 20 vampire is defeated, place legendary caches in hexes 7 and 8, and these are these 2 hexes on top and the bottom of this large tile. For either of these hexes, if it already has a cache, place the new cache in the closest hex without a cache. Then you may choose to set the round counter to party size. So once the vampire is defeated, you place those 2 legendary caches like that, and also at this very moment, if you want to, you can set the round counter to your party size, so you have potentially a few more rounds to offset the fatigue rounds. So let me remove those legendary caches for now and continue reading. At the end of a round, if the vampire is not in play, redeploy party size blood nexuses with party size HP to star hexes, and if there are not enough unoccupied star hexes, defeat units of your choice on star hexes until there are, and add the defeated unit's HP to the blood nexus that is deployed to its respective hex. Then deploy the vampire to hex A or to the closest unoccupied hex if hex A is occupied. Finally, deploy an enemy of the following level based on your difficulty level to the closest unoccupied hex to each blood nexus. For Apprentice none, you not deploy anyone. On Adept level 1 and on Expert level 5 enemy will be added to each newly added blood nexuses. Now let me move on. When an adventurer gains a light fatigue from a lockpick check, they must also increase the XP dial by 1 for each light fatigue gained. The higher the dial is, the more penalized you will be in the next quest step. When a cache is successfully unlocked, set the cache chip aside, and after party size +1 cache chips have been set aside, deploy Pale Fingers to hex B, defeating any unit occupying that hex, and place the set aside 7 hex delve tile in the open space to the right of the 19 hex tile. This is the secret room. For the purposes of movement, range and sight, the secret room is only considered to be adjacent to the 19 hex tile. And this encounter is successful at the end of a round in which all undefeated adventurers are occupying the secret room and Pale Fingers is not in play. All companions not occupying the secret room at the end of this encounter are are defeated. So that was quite lengthy, but let's break it down in simple terms what we need to do. This encounter is successful when all undefeated adventurers are here inside this secret room at the end of round. Okay, so this is your final destination where you need to be inside the secret room and then survive until the end of round. Now, in order for this secret room to actually appear, you need to set aside number of cash chips equal to party size +1. So for 2 adventurers, you would need a minimum of 3 lockpick checks. And in order to have more cash chips added to the map, you need to defeat Vampire. But in order to defeat Vampire, you need to first deal with Blood Nexuses. So that is sort of the chain reaction that you need to deal with. Once again, first you defeat Blood Nexuses, so then you can deal some damage to Vampire. Then you defeat Vampire to spawn more of those cash chips. Then you make lockpick checks and hopefully successfully unlocking them. Then these pale fingers will appear over here on hex B alongside the entrance to this room. And then you need to defeat the pale fingers, get inside the room and survive until the end of round. That is in a nutshell what you need to do in this encounter. Of course, with the caveat is that the Vampire will redeploy at the end of every round alongside Blood Nexuses and even potentially more enemies depending on your difficulty level. But remember that every time you defeat Vampire, and depending on your player count, you might actually need to defeat it multiple times. You may set the round counter to your party size, so definitely keep this in mind if you want to slightly delay the fatigue rounds. But that's it in a nutshell. Defeating Blood Nexuses, defeating Vampire, making lockpick checks. Repeat this process if needed. If you want more, set aside cash chips depending once again on your player count. Then defeat pale fingers, which will appear here on hex B. Then get inside the room and survive until the end of the round. As you can see, it's actually simpler than it may appear. Just one quick clarification about this secret room. I believe it's mentioned here at the end that this secret room, and for the purpose of movement, range and sight, this secret room is only considered to be adjacent to the 19 hex tile. Meaning that even if you reveal this tile and this secret room, you can only enter it from this large tile. So your adventurers or enemies or whoever that be, they would need to walk around. Even if they start here, for example, they cannot enter over here. You can imagine like invisible walls around this border. So you would actually need to go around over here, and only from this tile you can enter this your revealed secret room. So that is this encounter in a nutshell. Let me place this aside for now. As you can see, it's not as difficult as it might seem, at least rules wise, and of course I'll leave the exact strategy up to you, even though if you want to pick how you can potentially solve this, once again I have a full playthrough in Skyrim if you want to take a look how you can possibly solve it. Now let's move on to the day 2, which as always, or I should say oftentimes, is just a peaceful encounter, which means you have a little break from battle to battle. And maybe just as a quick reminder that there is no overland map in the endgame, you no longer travel, but if you want you can still make your adventure rest step at the end of day 1. So you complete this dungeon, this encounter, then you get 3 experience. You may spend those experience on advancements as usual. Then you have all the usual day phases except the activate province effect, simply because there is no towns and no need for that. But once you're done with advancements, and potentially your adventure rest, then you move on to day 2, where you have a peaceful encounter. And this one is plain and simple. It says each adventurer may select one of the following options, and multiple adventurers may select the same option. I'm gonna leave these choices completely up to you. There is nothing much to break down rules wise. I'll just read the last sentence which says, after each adventurer has selected one of the options, set aside the icy build-up delve card, and for every 5 points on the XP dial, you add 1 frostbite chip to icy build-up. Do not reset this card when advancing to day 3. So this is exactly what they were referring to, that higher number on this XP dial will make the final encounter more challenging, because for every 5 points you add 1 frostbite chip, which we already covered, reduces your health stat by 1. Now let's move on to the day 3, and that's going to be another very interesting encounter, and it's going to be a delve. And it says the following: set up the Greymoore Keep dungeon without placing any chips. So let me remove those chips for now, and you'll see why in a moment. Like that, and all of those chips as well. And then it says remove all tiles except the 19 hex tile and the entrance tile. These tiles must remain stationary, as adventurers will be revealing tiles in an attempt to connect them. So this is our large tile, the 19 hex tile. This is the entrance tile. They will live and stay as is, but everything else we're removing, and we're gonna try to connect and find our way from the entrance tile to the large tile, because it's gonna be delve. We will be adding and placing cards and placing delves in attempt to connect these two. This is why I said it's gonna be a really fun encounter. Now let me continue reading. It says, after setting up the tiles, deploy quest unit Vampiric Dislander to hex A and set up blood nexuses as normal. So instead of deploying vampire, we're deploying Vampiric Dislander over here, and we're also adding blood nexuses, again depending on the player count, but let's say for 2 adventurers that would be 2 stacks of 2 HP chips. I'm gonna place them like that. Then place cache in each hex adjacent to Vampiric Dislander. So we're gonna completely surround her with cache chips 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then we're gonna place 1 HP chip under 4 minus party size caches. So for 2 adventurers, 4 minus party size, that would be 2 cache chips, will have additional 1 HP chip under them, like that. 1 and 2. I've placed HP chip under 2 caches just like that, so you can see it from the top down. Then deploy party size level 20 enemies to hexes B, C and 7 and 8 in that order. Now for the party of 2, that will be 2 level 20 enemies. I have here Frost Atronach and Lamia, and we need to find hexes B and C. For that we need to consult the dungeon setup, which are on a few pages before that. So hexes B and C will be over here, 1 and 2, and of course you need to add HP to both of these enemies as normal. Let me add 7 HP under Frost Atronach and 8 HP under Lamia. Even though these 2 enemies, they are randomly drawn enemies, they are not specific, so it could be potentially any level 20 enemies. Then place level 20 Vampire as well as quest units Break the Bloody and Corrupted Creature in a stack in that order from top to bottom. So here we have those 3 mentioned enemies: Vampire, Break the Bloody and Corrupted Creature in that order, with Corrupted Creature being at the bottom, Break the Bloody in the middle and Vampire at the top. Lastly, calculate the EP using the end of session difficulty EP, and instead of deploying enemies based on your EP, place the enemies you would deploy on the bottom of the stack of enemies you created in order they would be deployed. So once again, the enemy pool depends on the player count and difficulty settings. You would just build your enemy pool as normal, but instead of deploying it, you build them in a stack in the order they would be deployed. So likely level 20 first and level 10, or potentially another 20, once again depending on your enemy pool, but most likely going to have a level 20 on top, finishing off with some level 1s at the bottom. You place them in this stack, and you place all of those enemies on the bottom of the stack with those quest enemies we created. So from the bottom to the top, we're going to have level 1 enemies, then some level 5, 10 depending on your EP, then level 20 on top. This is your enemy pool, and then on top you place in those 3 set aside enemies, namely Corrupted Creature, Break the Bloody and Vampire. This is all the enemy stack. We're gonna use this encounter. I'm gonna place this aside for now. Then let's go for the encounter rules. Initiate the following delve. So because it is a delve, once again, don't forget the icy build-up, especially since now you may already start with a couple of frostbite chips potentially, depending on the number on the XP dial. And of course you have your deck of delve cards and all of that as normal in any other delve. It says the following then: adventurers deploy to the entrance tile as normal, and the dungeon rules for Greymoore Keep are still in effect. And remember, the main rule about this dungeon is that the vampire cannot be defeated while blood nexuses are still active, and we'll get to that moment in a moment. Then it says, when a delve tile is revealed, do not deploy enemies from the enemy bag. Instead, deploy enemies from the top of the set aside stack, following the delve card's challenge scale for number of enemies but ignoring the card's listed enemy level. So just to break down that part first before we move on, let me actually place these set aside enemies somewhere over here, and let me reveal 1 delve card. Let's say we're starting here on the explorable hex, so we're triggering exploration, drawing delve card as normal, and we have this long shaped tile. So first of all, a very common mistake I see people doing in this dungeon, and by the way this is something I've been sometimes mistakenly doing as well, is that they're trying to connect the newly revealed tile, maybe something like that, or maybe this way because you have your home tile over there, so they connecting, right? Especially since we're trying to recreate the dungeon, so to speak. We're trying to connect the entrance tile to the large tile, and if you remember on the dungeon setup initially, this is how this tile was placed. But because we are not in a dungeon now, we are in a delve, and in a delve we're still following the normal Delve rules, meaning the very first tile you place in must connect both of these entrance tile sides, meaning it must be placing something like that instead. So now we have both sides of the home tile on the entrance tile are connecting this explorable hex. I thought I'd mention this first before we move on to the other side, to the other part of the rules. And speaking of the rules, it says that we ignoring the level of enemies, instead we deploy just simply number of enemies. And on this specific card, Frozen River, we deploy only a single enemy regardless of the player count actually. And that means we're not gonna deploy enemies from the bag, instead we're gonna deploy enemies from this created stack. Meaning this vampire will be the very first enemy you always deploy regardless of what enemy levels are depicted on this difficulty scale on the Delve card. So you always start with the vampire deploying first, somewhat like that in this case. Now let's move on with the rest of the rules, which says the following. Once the set aside stack is depleted, deploy enemies as normal when new Delve tile are revealed. So you always go through this stack, meaning you deploy a vampire, then you deploy Break the Bloody, then Corrupted Creature, then all the enemy pool you initially created starting with level 20 to level 1, and if all of this stack is depleted and you still need to deploy more enemies, only then you draw them from the bag as normal. Now, if a Delve tile has already been revealed this round, roll 1d6 each time an additional tile is revealed. If the rolled result is party size or lower, add 1 frostbite chip to icy buildup. So there is a little bit of penalty mechanism for exploring too quickly. Potentially you might end up with a lot of frostbite chips on this icy build-up card. Next, each time a sky shard is gained, you may choose to either remove 1 chip from the icy build-up, defeat 1 blood nexus, or reduce the round counter by 1. Then deploy the top enemy from the set aside stack to unoccupied hex on the entrance tile if possible. So sky shards is good in this case. Just gaining sky shard provide a little bit more extra bonuses for either removing a frostbite chip or defeating blood nexus or reducing the round counter by 1. And regardless of what of the 3 options you choose, then you always deploy the top enemy from the set aside stack to the entrance tile. Now here comes the most interesting part. The caches adjacent to Vampiric Dyslandra are blood thorns and they cannot be lock-picked. While Vampiric Dyslandra is undefeated, hexes with blood thorns are impassable and are not considered caches for any game effects. They cannot be targeted and cannot lose HP except through Vampiric Dyslandra's enemy skill Siphon as described below. Vampiric Dyslandra does not move if she is adjacent to any blood thorns. When she triggers Siphon, she also takes 1 HP chip from a single blood thorn if possible. If no blood thorn have HP chips under them, she instead places the Bloodthorn chip itself under her chip above her HP. When Vampiric Dyslandra would take any amount of damage, including true damage, if she has a Bloodthorn chip in her stack, she instead removes and discards 1 Bloodthorn from her stack to prevent all of that damage. And after Vampiric Dyslandra is defeated, each adventurer may heal to full HP and all enemies are dealt 2 true damage. With the battle objective is to conquer, meaning to defeat all enemies. And that all when it comes to rule. The rest of the page are about keyword. So let's break it down what it actually means for all those adjacent caches to Dyslandra. So these cache chips are called Bloodthorns and hexes with them are impassable. This is important because not only you cannot move through impassable hexes, but you cannot even count range through impassable hexes as well. Meaning not only you cannot deal effectively any damage to Dyslandra because you cannot count range and you cannot come adjacent, but even her own enemy skill Siphon also sort of cannot go beyond the range of those impassable hexes because you cannot count range and Siphon only works in range. So basically this is what's gonna happen at the end of her turn on round 1. She would first Siphon a single HP chip from a single Bloodthorns if any of them have any HP chip. So a single HP chip from a single Bloodthorn, that's the end of her turn 1, and she's not siphoning from anyone around just yet. Then if there is more HP chips under any Bloodthorns at the end of her next round, at the end of her next turn, she would repeat the process, taking another HP chip, but in this case it's the last HP chip. So then at the end of her next turn, she would start finally siphoning all of those Bloodthorns themselves, so we'd place all of those cache chips one at a time under her HP chip but above her HP. It would look like that. You're gonna have her health, then this Bloodthorn, then Dyslandra's chip herself, like that. And only now, once we have the breach around her impassable hexes, now you can start counting range for her Siphon to potentially siphoning from all the enemies and such, even though you would count range literally by hexes. So for example, this enemy and those two blood nexuses are in range 4, you can literally count 1, 2, 3, same thing 1, 2, but for example this enemy Lamia is not within the range of her siphon just yet, because you would need literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 range in order for her siphon to work. Even though of course it is completely up to you which exactly of those blood thorns you want to remove first. There may be sometimes a difference depending on how you want to play. And so she will siphon everything including those blood thorns every time she triggers siphon, and each of those blood thorns under her chip is effectively another protection, kinda like enhanced version of the enemy skill Stalwart, but kinda even better. And in order to knock off those blood thorns, you need to deal at least 1 bit of damage, but remember that her natural defense, the armor too, will soak the damage first. That means you would need to deal at least 3 damage, or at least 1 true damage, in order to knock off this bloodthorn. And of course you need to repeat the process for every bloodthorn that she has managed to suck off before you can actually take off her health. So yeah, that is the vampire you need to deal with, and as a reminder, your objective is to defeat all enemies. We have battle objective Conquer, so you not only need to defeat Vampiric Dislandra, but you need to defeat, well, everyone. And remember, this vampire that will always be deployed as the very first unit is immortal as well until those blood nexuses are defeated. So while you're trying to make your way to this large hex tile, Dislandra will power up herself, getting more and more defense with those blood thorns, while Vampire is sort of immortal, at least until you defeat those blood nexuses. Is staying here with you, permanently siphoning your health, and you need to survive through all of that. That, I must say, he is a quite challenging encounter, but rules-wise a couple of important things that I already mentioned, but just want to talk again, that Dislandra cannot siphon HP chips from blood nexuses or all enemies while she is completely surrounded with impassable hexes. She needs to make a breach first to remove at least 1 HP chip so we can start actually counting range from her in order to siphon HP chip from all other enemies. And well, that's about it. You just need to defeat all enemies, including this immortal vampire. So you need to defeat blood nexuses first, or reveal enough of sky shards, because once again, whenever you gain a sky shard, you can either instantly defeat one of the blood nexuses, or remove HP chip from icy buildup, or reduce the round counter by 1. So that is a little bit of help. And also, if you manage to defeat Vampiric Dislandra first before any other enemy, then it says each adventurer may heal to full HP and all enemies are dealt 2 true damage. So that is once again a little bit of extra help once you dealt with the boss with Dislandra. The rest of the enemies should be easier. And well, good luck and have fun playing this endgame. I think it's excellent. It's a really interesting challenge that I personally enjoyed a lot. And that's a wrap for today's video. I hope you find it useful, and if you did, don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I would really appreciate this as well. Now, if you are new to the game, I would highly recommend checking out the Beginner Guide series, where I go over some practical gameplay tips. And if you would like to see how this region plays and feels in action, then check out my full campaign playthrough series, where I play all 3 sessions in a given region from start to finish. And well, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.